The year 2020 will long be remembered in history as a time of global fears and deeply felt emotions about a killer virus turned pandemic, COVID 19, and the worldwide protests of police killing an African American man in Minneapolis. The brutal death of George Floyd, captured on video by a bystander, shocked millions who watched in horror. 3 weeks after, as we tape this segment, peaceful protests continue across the United States and the world, all calling for major police reforms and chanting, "Black Lives Matter." To get some unique perspective and to document this moment for history, the School of Journalism and Mass Communications at San Jose State University decided to contact 10 former students for their powerful and unique insights. The school took them on an extraordinary journey back through time in 2009. Photojournalism professor Dr. D. Michael Cheers came up with the idea of an education on wheels and wanted the 10 to see for themselves what it took for America to elect its first African American president. The group would travel across country, stop and learn at many of the landmarks of the civil rights movement in the South. They would report their findings across the country, arriving eventually in Washington at the celebration of the inauguration of President Barack Obama. Hello, I'm Professor Bob Rucker, journalism professor at San Jose State. I was part of that adventure back in 2009, but unfortunately, my mother passed away right after he was elected president, so I wasn't able to go. But today I'm joined by someone who was a wonderful person, my former teaching assistant, a dear friend, and a professional in the media himself, Justin Allegri. Justin, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Bob. And let me first say that it is very nice to see you in these trying times and hear your voice. And it's great that I think you're able to get the band back together, right? All the group of students that went on that trip to talk
Yes.
about what happened in '09 and now going on.
And each and every one of you will get a chance to do a 15-minute segment to describe where you've been since graduation and how this whole world event in 2020 has affected you. Let's start with that. How has this current George Floyd post-event affected you?
Yeah, I think back to 2009 on the trip, right? And on the trip, we were going to these civil rights landmarks and we were meeting people that were involved in the rights movement in the 60s. And you talk to them and you learn their stories. And at the time, I was thinking, gosh, I have a pretty good grasp of this. I feel like I know what's going on. I feel like I know what people are fighting for. But as the years have gone by, and in particular, now here in 2020, I've come to realize that understanding the history of the civil rights movement doesn't necessarily mean I can comprehend what's going on right now. I know what Bloody Sunday was like. I know the history of Bloody Sunday, but I don't know what it's like for an African American man to just live a normal Sunday.
Right.
So I think to put it into context helps me understand the fight that's going on right now, but it's hard to comprehend the 400 years of intense racism that this country has displayed. And you're seeing another boiling over point. And I say another because it's not the first time. This is just a different circumstance in which the boiling point has reached. And I think that now that this younger generation is maybe fighting this fight for the first time. And hopefully this fight will be different than times in the past. But it's remarkable to watch and to have that context of the civil rights in the 60s in the back of my head.
And I'm thrilled to hear you say that young people are getting engaged. We are seeing it all over the world, and I hope that continues for the betterment of humanity. Let me go back and ask you a little bit about what have you done since graduation?
Well, I've been pretty attached to San Jose State. I took a job very briefly up in Washington, but since then I've been hired as the broadcast and digital media coordinator at San Jose State Athletics. Which encompasses a lot of different multimedia things, but primarily I'm the play-by-play voice for football, basketball on TV and radio. And I also do some work outside of San Jose State with the San Jose Giants on the radio play-by-play side, and I have a voice on a video game, MLB The Show on PlayStation, which is pretty fun. So I've tried to keep my hands into every bit of media, like someone taught me. But it's been a lot of fun, and I've been fortunate to stay local and stay nearby some family and friends, and I love it in San Jose. So it's been a lot of fun for me.
I'd love to see him be the voice of the Chicago Cubs if they ever go back to play again, because he certainly would be great at it.
I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't mind.
That's my hometown team. Also joining us is Juan Cerna, who's the manager of our television production facilities here at San Jose State. Juan, thank you for keeping an eye on how this production rolls. Now, Justin, let's go back and talk about the trip in 2009. I met you all at the airport when you came back after talking to you for 10 days on the phone, where emotions were running high and people were nervous. CNN wanted to put you all on live television. Describe that experience in 2009.
Well, one thing I was going to say when you were introducing it and saying that you were back home because of the death of your mother, that didn't mean that you weren't part of the trip, because we were constantly talking to you over the phone, asking for advice about how to do certain elements of a piece. But I think when we started the trip, I think we all knew that it was going to be very impactful and it was going to have a lot of meaning, whether that meaning was different for one than the other. But I don't think that we knew it was going to gather as much momentum as it did and have the nationwide impact that it did. I mean, we were on CNN, obviously, but there were articles being put out in different newspapers as we were making our journey up the East Coast. And I'll never forget that, because that in itself tells the story of how important learning what was going on in the 60s is to older generations, and how important it is that we keep learning what's going on for the younger generation. So yeah, there was a, I mean, I remember not sleeping that much on that trip. We were working hard, and it's funny because technology has grown vastly since then. I was shooting on DV tapes. I mean, we didn't have SD cards, so we had to bring it into the computer system in real time, still in 2009. So we were working hard on that trip to put out the stuff that we did, and I'll never trade that experience for anything else.
I have a photo of you that you're sitting in someone's newsroom, I think a newspaper newsroom somewhere in the South, and you're trying to digitally try to get everything out so we could share it with the world. And you did a fantastic job with that. Let's talk a little deeper about the emotions of the trip for you. Describe the experience from your perspective, given how you were brought up.
You know, I reflected on that before this call, and it's tough because there were so many moments that you have to think back to, and some you try to remember because there were just so many that I think some prioritize over the other. But you know, my upbringing, we were in a very open household that we talked about this type of stuff. We talked about racism. We talked about the importance of including everybody, whether that be Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, or homosexual, whatever. You know, my parents are very open about that. So I went in with a mindset that, you know, a lot of people think this way. And I think on the West Coast, we kind of have more of that mindset. But this was my first trip to the South, and to understand truly what happened, and to see signs of segregation, and to see the Civil Rights Museum, where they had all of these, they had the buses, they had all these segregation signs and propaganda, what have you. It was eye-opening because, you know, that's not something we experience on the West Coast, and it certainly is not something that you can really touch. You don't have that history to look at. So the first day when we were in Memphis and we went to the Lorraine Motel, and there's that museum next to it or attached to it, it was eye-opening, right? To see where Dr. King was killed, to see all this history. And then from that point on out, there were just these other moments that just continued to open my eyes and open my eyes and open my eyes. And I always thought that you and Dr. Cheers did a brilliant job bookending the trip, where we talked with Reverend Kyles in Memphis. He was on the balcony with Dr. King. He told this just horrific story in great detail about that day, right? And it was just this silence in the room when he's talking. And that was the first interview we did. One of the last things we did was we went to the Woolworth counters in Greensboro. And they were saying, and I can't remember who brought us through, but They were saying that this was going to be a museum piece and people were not going to be able to sit at them anymore after a certain amount of weeks with us sitting there. So we were one of the last groups that ever got to sit down on those counter tables and chairs. So that was impactful, just to think about having people with hot coffee poured on them and
Right.
pushing and punching and whatever it is to try and get them out of just eating a meal. So it was shocking, and at the same time, it was ultimately educational, because I didn't have that perspective, and I couldn't have got that perspective anywhere else other than living those moments.
It's ironic too. I was just thinking as you were describing all those things. As a child, I grew up watching all of that unfold on the news
Right.
and having strong emotions. Here you are, generations later, taking this trip and walking back in those footsteps. It was a beautiful experience.
Yeah,
So
and
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think when you say watching it on the news, I think that generational gap in itself is something to talk about, because you guys were able to watch stuff live on the news or recorded, what have you, and it was reported to you.
Right.
Now we get our news on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, what have you, and we're seeing more of these atrocities in very focused areas and in small groups. And that doesn't mean that it's not as impactful or as horrific, but it means that you see more of them.
Right.
And the fact that we see more of them, I think, helps this movement, and I know we'll talk about it later, helps this movement gain more traction, and more importantly, helps the movement not be forgotten. Because that's something that needs to be stated in this, is that we always remember the horrible atrocities that happen because they're historic, but you don't remember the little things. And I think now this generation won't allow people to forget the little things. And I think that's going to be huge.
It's very important. Very important indeed. Very quickly, I want to bring you back to a moment. I have another great shot of you. Someone is kissing you in a newsroom at CNN. Do you remember that moment?
Yes, I remember that moment. Yes, Kira Phillips was completely gracious and so kind to bring us on the air with her on her show. And I mean, they gave us the royal treatment. They put us in their green room. They allowed us to sit in the conference meeting. They took us in their production areas. And after the segment was over, she had us all come out and individually take pictures. And I don't remember what I said to her, but she's something to the effect of, I think people are going to be jealous. And she said, "Oh, how about now?" And she kisses me on the cheek. And the thing that I remember about that is that our group let out this roar, like this laugh, whatever. And the meteorologist at the time was on the air. He was doing a live hit. And I remember him kind of fumbling through it. And then when we stopped and there were a couple minutes had gone by, he looked over at Kira Phillips and he was laughing and kind of joking about it. He goes, "Well, I guess the group got on national TV twice today after that moment." So
Well,
yeah, it was pretty good.
It was special. I know we recorded all of that in San Jose and people were cheering for you. We felt so very proud of all of you. You eventually made your way to Washington. Very quickly, describe what that scene was all about.
It was organized chaos, because I would never want to be in that size of a group ever again. I mean, we're talking about 1 million people, right? And we got off the subway station and you could barely get off the train. You're sitting there on the platform just waiting for the crowd to move. So under a normal circumstance, I would have kind of been freaked out, but there was just this very odd and eerie calm. Everybody was quiet. Everybody was excited for the same reason. Nobody was pushing and shoving. They were there for the moment. And if they weren't just there for the moment, it would have freaked me out. But I think because of that, we were just, all right, this is a moment in history we know is coming, and we're going to all enjoy it together. And you walk outside, and I remember seeing every type of law enforcement agency I could think of. I mean, there was Secret Service, there was Capitol Police, there was the National Guard, there was the Army, there were snipers on the rooftops, there were Philadelphia cops, New York cops, everything. But it was completely calm, normal. I didn't see one incident. Everybody was there to watch Obama speak, and that was it. And when it was over, everybody walked away, everybody was happy, and everybody was reflecting. And I don't think you can get that amount of people together again and have that type of calm attitude about them. And that's all. I mean, that's the biggest thing I took out of it, because honestly, you probably could have watched the inauguration speech on TV and had a better view than we had, but you weren't there and experienced that. So I'll never forget that.
I know millions of people did watch, and we all wanted to be there in your shoes, although we could see how crowded that was.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, compare that to what's been happening now in the year 2020, when the current president of the United States enables the military to be a presence in the streets to basically clear the way so that he can make a presentation or for him to have a show of force. How did that feel for you?
It's interesting because that's the first thing I thought of, right? And the first thing I thought of is, gosh, in the Obama inauguration, we could just walk right up and not have an issue. And granted, different circumstances, right? There was a speech coming. They had everything barricaded off for crowd control, what have you. And you always taught me to keep my political views away from the scene. And I think now that media is changing into, you have to at least give a little bit of your opinion to know where your narrative's coming from. I think it was atrocious that US forces were used to disperse crowds. I mean, Constitution says I can go and assemble wherever I want, right? We call ourselves a free nation, but it's been very evident over the last year in particular, but over really the last decade. Well, you want to take a knee during the national anthem? You can't do that. But we're a free country? Well, no, you can't do that. Well, you want to peacefully assemble and protest the death of George Floyd? Well, only if you do it a specific way. What's that about? You want to call out police brutality? Well, that's a no, because you can't do that. We need to fund the police. I mean, just last week, writing in chalk, Black Lives Matter. Apparently that's an issue too, on your own property. So using troops on something that's a constitutional right, if that was being done 10 years ago, and if it was being done to a base of Republican or supporters, hold out my mic.
Nothing like live television, right?
Sorry about that. I was getting animated. I was getting animated. Sorry.
It's all right. Go, brother. Go.
If that was done to a group of conservatives, the story would have been of this just audacity, right? That the atrocities, the being brought down American freedoms. But to have the president go and hold up a Bible in front of a church for a photo op, I mean, come on. It was very clear that was only a stunt, and the fact that he dispersed a crowd with his use of force because he's the president to do that stunt is disgusting. It's disgusting. And I don't know how else to describe it other than it's just ridiculous that is something we're living through and watching happen in 2020.
The last thing that I want to ask you on this video is, you had the experience of the inauguration trip in 2009. You've seen time go by, and now this moment. Do you think this moment will be different? Will something come of all this? Yes,
I hope, right? Because that's what you look at. You go to these civil rights landmarks and you learn about them, and you kind of understand what change happened, right? But if you kind of think about it, right? Selma to Montgomery marches started because the voting rights in Alabama. Yes, you can vote if you're a Black person, but we'll make it really difficult for you to register. So you're allowed to vote, but there's some hoops you have to jump through, right? Well, how is that any different than going through hoops to get a housing loan, right? Mm-hmm. If I'm a white person and I go to apply for a loan for a house, oh, how's your credit score? All right, good. Well, we'll give you the loan. Well, now it's like, well, if you're a Black person, oh, your credit score is okay, but we have these other things that we're looking at, and I don't know about that. It's different, but it's the same. So when I look at these movements, and I was talking about, it's not okay to kneel. How is that any different than wanting to sit in the front row of a city bus that's segregated?
Right.
I mean, it's not, right? It's a different problem, but targeted to the same solution, right? So I hope, and this goes back to what I was talking about social media, I hope that things aren't forgotten as easily, because I think in the 60s and in the 70s, things were changed to fit the narrative of the people that wanted to affect the change, right? The politicians that said, oh, well, we're changing things for you. We're really listening to you. But they just changed the rules so that they applied to something different. And I think now that social media is more prevalent, and especially that the young voters have a big voice, they're not going to allow them to forget that. And that's my hope, right? And I always hate the argument that people have, oh, the Black people always have an issue with something. Well, they always have an issue with something because those issues are so great that they have to isolate one by one by one by one by one and fight those individual battles to try and affect the overall greater change. And you just can't fight every problem at once.
Right.
So I hope that this and oftentimes in history, atrocities and violent acts affect change, right? But
Right.
I want actions to be made and change to be affected by nonviolent acts, right? I don't want George Floyd to be the reason that X, Y, and Z happens. It'd be great if change does happen, but why does he have to give his life for it to happen? Why doesn't it just happen because it's the right thing to do?
Right.
And I hope that more people being engaged, and especially the younger generation being engaged, I hope that trickles down, and I hope that makes a difference. And I hope we're not sitting here 15 years from now talking about some future Black teenager that got shot for carrying candy, walking back home from a convenience store. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So it's hard to project that out, though, because we've seen it too many times before to know that it hasn't changed.
I love how you speak from the heart, and certainly the way you bring in all the historic examples. The time is now.
Yeah.
Justin, we're going to be talking to the rest of your team that went on the 2009 group to the inauguration, but thank you for kicking us off in a great fashion.
I appreciate it, Bob, and this is going to be great. I can't wait to see everybody.
Very good. And we're going to get everybody together after we've done all the one-on-ones and share that with the world and for posterity.
Very good. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Keep up the good work, and somebody give this guy a broadcast job.
I'll take it.